In a land scorched dry by 3 years of failed rains, the barren earth that should be growing crops has been turned to dust. This dust used to be the fertile soil these communities once farmed to feed themselves. Now they try to hide from it, taking shelter from sandstorms in trees that provide no protection. Asha said she'd been left with nothing. I lost 2 baby daughters to the drought, she told me. My husband lies sick at home, unable to get up. I've come here for help. This is the help Asha and so many others have come here for, life-giving water.
This is where the aid is most needed, in some of the remotest parts of Somaliland, to communities who are not only vulnerable, but living in the harshest of conditions.
In the midst of nature's awesome power and cruelty, this is what coming to people's aid looks like. The water's been trucked in over hundreds of miles, made possible by the donations of British people who responded to the DEC's emergency appeal. The relief and hope it gives where there was once none is etched into people's faces. Ahmed Adam Mohammed is head of operations for the UK charity ActionAid. He told me the aid had kept many alive, but there was still a long way to go.
That aid has actually saved the lives of many people who have actually been dead by today as we speak. But then it doesn't mean that it has already completely been alleviated.
So the crisis isn't over?
It's not over.
We travelled further into eastern Somaliland. Getting aid to such regions is no easy task, but these are the communities who need it most. Nomadic settlements relied on their herds for income and food, but they've lost almost 90% of their animals to the drought. These supplies from UK agencies of flour, rice, cooking oil and sugar is what feeds them now. Asha Haji Farah's family is one of 500 here that get 25 kilos of supplies every month. The reality, however, is that it doesn't just feed them. There are others arriving all the time. And so the supplies that she carries to her home, and which is meant just for them, is shared with several other families. It's the same for everyone else. She told me that her message to the people in Britain is, thanks to you, this food has helped us so much. But still, there are many who are in need. We need your help. This aid, bought with British public donations and now beginning to be delivered in these remote regions of Somaliland, is a lifeline that arrived just in time to avert famine. It doesn't mean that the threat has gone and people are still dying from diseases associated with malnutrition. If the rains fail again in the coming months, millions more will be at risk and in need of more assistance that only this kind of lifeline can give. Raage Oomaar, News at 10, Eastern Somaliland. Muhammad Abdi is 4 years old, yet so ravaged is he by hunger and illness that he looks less than half that age. He's having to be cared for in hospital by his grandmother Khadr. She told me that although some food had arrived and that it had even rained a bit, rural communities were still in the grip of severe illness. So many diseases have affected us, she told me. Many have died, from the old to the very young, especially from terrible diarrhea, which has spread so fast. This pediatric ward in the city of Burco is dealing with one disease above all else that has acute diarrhea as its classic symptom: cholera. I was last in this children's ward in May, just as the outbreak was beginning. At its height, some areas were dealing with up to 500 cases a day. In the grounds of the hospital, they've erected these quarantine tents to deal with the most severe new cases until they're able to be housed in the wards.
Of course, it is linked directly to the drought because, people were drinking. When it started to rain, there were so many animals that were dead and they were being washed into the water reservoirs which were open. And so that's how things started.
It's a cruel irony that in the midst of terrible droughts, it's water that spread cholera so quickly and widely. With the rains having failed for 3 years, people consume whatever small patches of water they can find, even sharing it with what remains of their herds. Many stagnant pools have been infected with human waste or the rotting carcasses of dead animals. We came across Samira after a community worker alerted us to her case. She's just 1 year old and suffering from acute watery diarrhea that comes with cholera, and she has to be taken to hospital immediately. The authorities in the city of Burco have rushed to put together teams of volunteers with makeshift campaign buses to go into communities to educate people about how to avoid contracting the disease. Mohammed lost 3 of his children to cholera. The worst thing that could happen to anyone happened to me, he told me. A father who had to bury 3 young children, who only yesterday were calling me dad and playing with me. That's what's driven me to educate others about this disease, so they don't have to go through that. We returned back to the hospital to see how little Mohammed Abdi was doing, but he had deteriorated badly. His lung had collapsed and he was struggling to breathe. He was gravely ill and in danger. The doctors said they had to take him to surgery immediately. He was carried there by his uncle who'd consented to the operation, and the doctors said we'd know if it had worked within 10 minutes. Eventually, the doctors managed to release the pressure on Mohammed's lungs, but they said he was not out of danger. He'd been so weakened by illness and malnutrition as a result of Somaliland's drought that his respite is only temporary. The wound from his operation has become infected, and no one knows when or if Mohammed will ever get better. Raage Oomaar, News at 10, Burco, Somaliland.